The year was 1979. The streets of Tehran were not filled with the sounds of commerce, but with the roar of millions. A king, the King of Kings, whose lineage claimed a 2,500-year-old link to Cyrus the Great, was climbing into a Boeing 727, carrying a small box of Iranian soil. He would never return. This was the moment the world shifted on its axis. But to understand why the most westernized nation in the Middle East chose to trade a monarchy for a theocracy, we have to stop looking at 1979 as a beginning. We have to look at it as a climax. A climax of a century-long struggle over a single viscous liquid buried beneath the sand, and a pride that no amount of foreign gold could buy. This is the story of how the quest for modern oil met the wall of ancient faith. This is the collapse of the peacock throne and the birth of a geopolitical storm that still shakes our world today. To the casual observer in 1960, Iran was the miracle of the Orient. Under Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, the country was undergoing what he called the White Revolution. It was a breathtaking attempt to drag a feudal society into the 20th century overnight. Women in Tehran wore miniskirts and studied nuclear physics. Land was taken from the clergy and given to peasants. Literacy rates skyrocketed. The Shah was the ultimate ally of the West. A man who spoke fluent French and dreamed of making Iran the fifth greatest industrial power on earth. He was the gendarme of the Persian Gulf, armed to the teeth with the latest American fighter jets. But underneath this glittering facade of steel and glass, a structural rot was festering. The White Revolution had a shadow. When you modernize a country's skin but forget to stabilize its heart, you create a monster called inequality. The elite in North Tehran were living like Parisian royalty, while the rural migrants in the shantytowns felt like strangers in their own land. The Shah had destroyed the traditional power of the landlords, but in doing so, he had accidentally turned the only remaining organized force in the country into his greatest enemy, the mosque. To the deeply conservative masses, the Shah wasn't just a leader. He was a puppet of the great Satan, an architect of Westoxification. But the seeds of 1979 were actually planted decades earlier, in a betrayal that most Americans have forgotten, but every Iranian remembers as if it were yesterday. We have to talk about 1953. We have to talk about Mohammad Mosaddegh. He was an elderly, aristocratic statesman with a singular obsession, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. For years, the British had been taking the lion's share of Iranian oil profits, paying Iran less than they paid their own laborers. Mosaddegh stood up in the parliament and did the unthinkable. He nationalized the oil. He kicked the British out. For a brief moment, Iran felt like it finally owned its soul. But the empire did not take kindly to losing its fuel. The British, unable to reclaim the refineries by force, turned to the young CIA. They convinced Washington that Mosaddegh was a secret communist. What followed was Operation Ajax. It was the first time the United States practiced the art of the regime change. They hired street thugs, bribed military officers, and orchestrated a coup that toppled the democratically elected Mosaddegh and restored the Shah to absolute power. The Shah got his throne back, and the West got its oil. But the price of that oil was the permanent destruction of Iranian secular democracy. From that day on, the Shah's crown was stained with the ink of foreign intelligence. The people saw him not as a king, but as a colonial manager. With Mosaddegh gone, the Shah became increasingly paranoid. He created SAVAK, one of the most feared secret police forces in history. In the cafes of Tehran, people stopped talking about politics. Walls had ears. If you whispered the wrong name, you disappeared into the depths of Evin prison. The Shah believed that as long as the economy grew and the army was strong, the people would remain silent. He was wrong. Silence in a dictatorship is not the absence of noise, it is the accumulation of pressure. And in the late 1970s, the pressure reached the breaking point. The storm began with a paradox of wealth. In the early 1970s, following the global oil crisis, the price of crude skyrocketed. Iran was suddenly flooded with petrodollars. The Shah, blinded by visions of grandeur, decided to accelerate military spending and industrialization at a breakneck pace. But this tidal wave of cash did not bring shared prosperity. It brought hyperinflation. In Tehran, rents tripled in a single year. Peasant farmers who had abandoned their ancestral lands to chase the urban dream suddenly found themselves living in shanty towns, staring at skyscrapers they could never enter. While the masses struggled, the Shah staged the 2,500-year celebration of the Persian Empire at Persepolis. It was the most expensive party in modern human history. It was a grotesque display of elitist decadence. It was at this precise moment that a voice emerged from exile, a voice of absolute authority and uncompromising conviction: Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini was not a traditional politician. He was an elderly cleric with piercing eyes who had been expelled by the Shah in the 1960s from a modest apartment in the suburbs of Paris. He sent home cassette tapes containing thunderous sermons. His message was simple: the Shah is the enemy of Allah. America is the great Satan. We must reclaim our nation through faith. These tapes were smuggled into bazaars, factories, and universities. Khomeini succeeded in uniting the most unlikely of allies: Marxists, liberal students, and traditional merchants under a single banner: the overthrow of the monarchy. By 1978, the resentment exploded into action. A government-sponsored article defaming Khomeini served as the final spark. Protests erupted in Qom, then spread to Tabriz and Tehran. The Shah's military responded with iron every time a protester was killed. 40 days later, according to Islamic tradition, a memorial service became an even larger protest. The Shah, secretly battling terminal cancer, became paralyzed by indecision. He did not know whether to crush the rebellion or offer concessions, but the time for concessions had passed. On Black Friday in 1978, hundreds were gunned down in Yalash Square. The blood in the streets washed away the last shred of the throne's legitimacy. Even the oil workers, the lifeblood of the economy, went on strike. The country stood still. In January 1979, realizing the army would no longer protect him, the Shah boarded his plane and left. Weeks later, Khomeini returned to a welcome of millions. This was more than a change of government. It was the total collapse of a value system. The Western world watched in horror as a strategic pillar turned into a hostile theocracy overnight. But the climax of the confrontation was yet to come. In November 1979, revolutionary students climbed the walls of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. This event did not just end Jimmy Carter's presidency. Iran transitioned from the gendarme of the Gulf to an international pariah, beginning an era of sanctions, proxy wars, and nuclear standoffs that define our world today. The victory of the revolution was not the end of the struggle. It was the beginning of a bloody baptism. Sensing a moment of terminal weakness, Saddam Hussein, Iraq, launched a full-scale invasion of Iran in 1980. Saddam expected a quick victory over a disorganized revolutionary army. Instead, he triggered an 8-year cataclysm that would become the longest conventional war of the 20th century. For the Islamic Republic, the Iran-Iraq War was the sacred defense. It was here that the regime consolidated its power, using the external threat to silence internal dissent and forging the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, into a formidable state within a state. The war was a meat grinder. It saw the return of trench warfare, the horrific use of chemical weapons by Iraq, and human wave attacks by young Iranian volunteers who marched into minefields with plastic keys to paradise around their necks. The world, largely fearing the spread of the Islamic Revolution, backed Saddam. The United States provided intelligence. European nations provided the precursors for poison gas. Yet Iran did not break. By the time the ceasefire was signed in 1988, 1 million people were dead, and the map hadn't moved an inch. But the Iranian psyche had changed forever. They learned a bitter lesson. In a world of giants, Iran stands alone. As the smoke cleared from the battlefields, Iran began to export its revolution through strategic depth, unable to match the conventional military spending of the U.S. Backed Gulf monarchies, Tehran mastered the art of asymmetric warfare. They built a network of proxies, the axis of resistance, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen and militias in Iraq. Iran extended its reach across the Levant. This was not just about religion, it was about creating a buffer zone. If the war ever came again, Tehran wanted it fought on someone else's soil. Then came the 21st century, and the era of the nuclear file. Iran's nuclear program became the ultimate flashpoint. Tehran claimed it was for energy and medical isotopes. The West feared it was a sprint for the bomb. This led to a decade of crippling economic sanctions, cyber-accident like the Stuxnet virus, and the assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. The 2015 nuclear deal JCPOA offered a brief moment of de-escalation, a promise of Iran reintegrating into the global economy. But the world learned once again how fragile international agreements are when the U.S. withdrew in 2018, plunging the region back into maximum pressure and brinkmanship. Today, Iran stands at a crossroads. It is a nation of 85 million people, with a highly educated youth population that is increasingly disconnected from the rigid ideology of 1979. It is a country with the world's second-largest gas reserves and fourth-largest oil reserves, yet its people struggle with inflation and isolation. The peacock throne is long gone, replaced by a complex system of clerical rule and military influence that faces its greatest internal challenges in decades. As we stand in the present day, looking back at the long arc of Iranian history, we are forced to confront a haunting reality. The story of Iran is not just a story of a nation, it is a case study in the friction between ancient identity and modern power. For over a century, the soil of this land has been treated as a gas station for the industrial world, and its people as pawns in a great game they never asked to play. The tragedy of the Shah was his belief that a nation's soul could be bought with fighter jets and luxury boutiques, while its political heart was kept in a cage. He attempted to build a great civilization on a foundation of oil, but he forgot that oil is a slippery substance to build a throne upon. By the time he realized that a people's dignity cannot be replaced by a higher GDP, the mosque had already become the only sanctuary where the voice of the oppressed could be heard. Yet, the Islamic Republic that followed has faced its own reckoning. The revolution that promised bread, freedom, and independence has found itself locked in a permanent state of siege. The axis of resistance has given Iran immense regional influence, but at the cost of being the most sanctioned nation in history. The internal struggle we see today, the protests, the cultural shifts, the yearning of the youth is the next chapter of that same century-old question. Can Iran be both modern and authentic? Can it be powerful without being a pariah? The lesson of 1979 is that history is not a straight line toward progress. It is a pendulum. When the pendulum is pushed too far toward foreign intervention and forced westernization, it will inevitably swing back toward radical traditionalism with violent force. The world often looks at Iran and sees only a threat or a problem. But if we look deeper, we see a civilization that has survived the Greeks, the Arabs, the Mongols, and the British. It is a nation that refuses to be erased. As we move further into the 21st century, the Iran problem will not be solved by more sanctions or more threats. It will only be understood when the world recognizes that for Iranians, 1979 was just a religious shift. It was a declaration that they would rather be masters of their own ruin than servants of someone else's empire. Whether the current system evolves or fractures, the Persian spirit remains a permanent fixture on the global chessboard. The peacock throne is gone, the Shah is a memory, and the Ayatollahs are aging, but the land of Iran, with its deep-seated pride and its strategic tavern of the world location, will continue to shape the destiny of humanity for another 2,500 years.